for coming to my session, the last session of today. My name is Robert Douglas. I work for a company called Platform.sh, and I live in Germany, so I had a nice train ride over here this morning. And when I create sessions to give at DrupalCamps, especially DrupalCamps, because it's a little relaxed and you can try out new exciting stuff, then I really allow my imagination to go crazy. And I think, wow, what would I do if I could just do anything on Earth? So I came up with this great session title, trying Headless Drupal-8 with Angular.js, MongoDB, and HipHop VM. Great title. I mean, it's a little bit of clickbait here and there. The Headless Drupal is a hot topic. I saw a couple other sessions on the roster today that talked about headless, so that's how I know I'm one of the cool kids. And headless often goes with something like Angular, so hitting all the buzzwords there, but boom, MongoDB. Nobody else had that one, I knew that. So total clickbait there. And HipHop VM, who even knows what HipHop VM is? I mean, you're here to find out, right? That sounds so cool, you had to come to my session and not that lousy theming session that somebody else is doing. Right. And if you had read the session description, you'd notice that I even name-dropped a couple other technologies like PostgreSQL. That's not the exciting stuff that, gets your blood boiling, but, there's some hardcore geeks out there that I'm sure that are here just to see the PostgreSQL stuff. So, this was a session that was like clickbait from top to bottom. If I had really wanted to take it a couple steps further, I would have thrown in a couple other promises like free beer, and if I had just gone all out and made the session of my fantasy, it would have looked something like that. And then everybody would have come, and the other room would be totally empty. But, well, that's fantasy. So I actually had to backtrack on a couple of the things because I waited a little too long to prepare, and over the last couple of days it turns out that a couple of things had shifted underneath me and broken. So the new session title, without any clickbait, just full of fact, is trying Headless Drupal-8 with Angular.js, PHP 5.5 and 5.6, and profiling them with Blackfire.io. But actually that's pretty exciting. So I'm not unhappy with what I have to show you today. It's just not exactly what was advertised. I will talk about those other things though, like what about MongoDB? Well, it turns out the last time I had actually really checked in with the state of MongoDB on Drupal 8 was when Chix was raving about how great it was going about a year ago or a year and a half ago, and that was actually shortly before he stopped working on it altogether, and it's hopelessly broken. Completely not even anything running at the moment. So I couldn't do that. What about PostgreSQL? Well, I was going to do that on Platform.sh, and we run PostgreSQL successfully on Platform.sh, even with Drupal 7, but it turns out that only on Platform.sh, only on Drupal 8, there's a mismatch between the way the drivers are loaded right now, and we've got to fix that, and I just couldn't get that done in time for the session, so it's actually broken on Platform.sh. So it's Platform's fault. What about HipHop VM? My colleague and I gave a great presentation at DrupalCon in Barcelona showing Drupal 7 headless. No, it was actually Drupal 8 headless, and it was Drupal 8 headless and Angular on HipHop VM. We actually successfully did that. Well, guess what? In the meantime, they've gone and fixed so many security problems on Drupal 8 that they actually security'd me out of my demo. So yesterday it turned out that it just doesn't work anymore, my demo, and I wasn't able to fix that either. So that's off the list too. And it's Drupal's fault for fixing the security problems. Okay, that's fine. So that's all the caveats. Now, the most important information I'm going to give you that pertains to the next 40 minutes or so of your life are the URLs to the repos that if you want to follow along with all of the live demos that I'm about to give and look at all the code that I'm going to show you and all the configuration that I'm going to show you, you'll check these out. It's really easy. You go to github.com, you search for Robert Douglas, that's me, and since I'm not the biggest GitHub committer on earth, you'll easily find the Headless Drupal-8 Platform.sh repository. Or you could type in goo.gl/0fxn5z, or I even put a bit.ly link there. And if that's not enough for you, and if you don't really feel like typing that in, but you do have your smartphone handy, I even made a QR code. So go for it. It's definitely going to be interesting for you, and there are also instructions for how you can recreate these examples that I'm going to show you on Platform.sh for free, which might be fun for you to try. All right, okay, that was the intro. From here on out, it's actually a live demo. So I've got to position my microphone, take a seat, and see how I can type and talk at the same time, if that's going to work. I've got my doubts already. How's that? Okay, we're in business. So, what am I going to talk about and show you? We're going to profile a decoupled application on 2 versions of PHP using the Blackfire IO tool and some other stuff. But let's first talk about what we've got going here. So I've got a very simple Drupal-8 site that I've built. It's got some imported movie database information. You can probably see that better if I actually click the Content tab here. So for example, if I go to Discounts and Easy Digital Downloads, that's a movie that's been grabbed from YouTube. It's not even displaying as a video here. That's fine, because Drupal in a decoupled headless situation is just a content store and an API provider. You can see that in that we've also got this, let me get to the link again. We've got this Angular.js front-end application that's pulling a data feed from the Drupal backend in order to give you this very exciting display of the movie listing that I've built. Now, the coolness of this particular web application cannot be contested. I know you all want a copy of this because it's that cool, because it's a listing of movies that doesn't even have a pager on it, right? No search box, no pager, no nothing. But it is a nice proof of concept. If you click through to any of these, you'll also see that the Angular.js app is not completely working properly because it's blocking there's a nice thing, what do you call it? There's some header that it needs that allows it to grab the video from the other domain, the YouTube domain. And I wasn't able to figure that out because I'm not an Angular.js developer. So you have to live with the overwhelming excitement of the videos looking like this. But that's also not the point of what I'm going to show you. The point is that this Angular app is just this wee tiny little bit of JS code that gets sent to the browser, and then it comes back to the Drupal site, which was over here, and it hits this data feed called movie, and it gets this blob of data, and it knows how to build the app with that and how to interact with it and drill down into the individual listings. And it's basically a decoupled JavaScript application that's making API calls to a constant content store that's driven by Drupal-8. So your content providers have, all of the nice forms to add new movies to the database, and they'll show up in the Angular app in real time. Okay, so that's the advantage of a decoupled Drupal-8, headless Drupal-8 Angular.js app. We've had a couple sessions on that today, so I'm going to assume you're pretty aware of all of the other advantages and some of the methodologies for developing those. What can I show you about that, though, that you haven't seen? Well, that's where you're going to want to have that GitHub repository open and look at the structure of how that's done, because what we've got here is a repository that when I push that to Platform.sh, that builds that entire application that you've seen just now, both the Drupal app and the Angular app, as separate applications. You can deploy each of them independently. You can make as many branches on Platform.sh as you need to test them independently, and every branch will have its own running version of that. So I can show you, here's the platform, and here I've got the master branch, which I'm running off of, which I just showed you, but there are also branches for me to test Postgres, it's broken. MySQL works fine. Mongo, it's broken. And I can make as many more branches as I want. Like if I wanted to make a branch to try to fix that YouTube problem, I could make a YouTube fix branch. Oops, no, I can't because I didn't give myself enough possibility to make branches. I'd have to turn one off first. Let me do that. The Mongo branch is broken anyway. Anyway, I don't need to demo platform to you. I do that every day, all day long. It's my job. In any case, you push this Git repository to platform, and it builds it, and you've got your two applications. Now, what's hard about decoupled applications? Okay, a couple things are hard. So first thing is that you're going to have teams with differing skill sets. You're going to have a Drupal team, and you already have a range of skills inside of your Drupal team. So you've got the backend module writing types, and then you've got the front-end theming types, and that's your Drupal team. But then Angular takes it a step further. You might have people on your team or a special team altogether for the Angular app who are only developing against the promise of an API that Drupal is going to deliver. They know nothing about Drupal. They might not ever log into Drupal. They maybe have never installed Drupal in their lives, which, you know, for most of the Angular app developers out there is probably the truth. So how do you reconcile that in terms of project delivery when you've got these two disparate teams whose software depends on each other? That's where DevOps comes in, and that's where it's very nice in this case that you can push this Git repository to Platform.sh and have both of those apps running at once. Okay, let's look at how it's actually put together. So let's look at the Angular first. This was put together with Yeoman and Bower. Who's familiar with those? Okay, so there's more knowledge in this room about Yeoman and Bower than I possess in my head, so I'm not going to talk about it very much because this is not my forte. However, I do know that there are some specifications that you give Platform to control the build and deploy process of this application. So let's look at that a little bit. So after I push this code up, then some steps are needed to build the Angular app with all of its dependencies in a way that it's able to run. And this is something that has to be done for any Angular app, whether you use Yeoman or not. And the steps include things like running npm install, which will probably go and get the something like package.json. I don't even know. I'm guessing. You can correct me if I'm wrong. But it will get something like that, and it'll find all the dependencies that are specified for JavaScript and install them. Bower will also install some other dependencies that npm can't install, and then Grunt is going to go and put it all together in the way that it's supposed to be. And then the final command there is just to make a read-write directory for what I don't even know. That's all in a phase of the DevOps operation that can be considered the code building phase. Okay, now what are the problems in modern teams around code building? There are lots of ways to do this, and there are lots of ways it gets done. You could have the Angular team do that all on their laptop and commit the resulting files up into your repository and just deploy them. That's fine. They've got responsibility for getting it all done, and whatever they deliver to you, you can deploy. But it does mean that you can't ever change anything, even if you know how to write Angular code, because you don't actually know how they built that. So they might have a build script that puts it all together that looks like that, and you might have different versions of npm or Bower, you might have slightly different variations in the build script, and there might be an inconsistency that you introduce to the application if you try and build it yourself. So maybe it's better to centralize that build process on a shared infrastructure like a shared server. So that's the build process, and that gets done on Platform. Then the deploy process happens after the code's been built, but the other things in the application have to come together. And what do I mean by other things? Other things in a web application include code, which we just built, but also running services and persistent storage. There are even other things like networking and stuff, but let's not talk about those. So after the code has been built, on Platform, it gets put onto a read-only file system, and then it gets shipped to where the running services can use it. So for a PHP application, then the code's going to be attached to the PHP container. For a Python application, then the code's going to get attached to the Python container, etc. And then, of course, there's not in an Angular app, but in a lot of other apps like Drupal, there's persistent storage. There's uploaded files, there's the database that needs to run, there's the Solr index that needs disk space. Those are the other things that are needed besides the code, and those come together in the deploy phase. For this app, in the deploy phase, then what we're doing here is simply at the last minute determining what branch this is on, because remember I showed you on Platform you could have several branches, and when you actually deploy an application onto a different set of infrastructure and make a copy of it, it by nature has to have a different host name, and that becomes problematic for your testing process, especially in a decoupled application situation, because all of a sudden the host name that you access the Angular app is different, and the host name with which you access the Drupal application is different, and the two have to be able to talk to each other, and they have to do cores and all of sorts of stuff based on these host names. So you actually need a bit of a contextual awareness about what your host name is going to be, so that these applications can actually talk to each other dynamically without you having to go in and configure something about a host name. So that last bit of blobby stuff that makes your eyes bug out is simply us reading out the environmental variable that says what's the host name from the Drupal application, so that it can actually call out to it, because that's what the Angular application does. It calls out to the Drupal application and grabs the data. All right, so that's the Angular application. You can see all that in action, and it's quite fun, and I'm going to actually change something just for the sake of changing it and showing you. So if I show you where I am, I'm at the top layer here on my file system. I'll go into the Angular app, and let's see, let's find something that's really safe to change. Let's change the README, unless somebody knows how to fix that YouTube problem, in which case we'll go do that. No? Darn. So, what we'll do is we'll say, hello DrupalCamp Leuven, and we'll push that up to Git, because that definitely belongs in this app. So the way to do that then is, of course, git add, git commit. It's really catchy, like some dance moves here. Updating the README, and git push. So the remote that I have on this, of course, is Platform. I also have a remote to the GitHub repository, but you can see that it's pushing that to the master branch on Platform. Now, the rest of the team who might be also looking at this will be able to see that, in fact, master is being deployed and stuff is going on. What does that mean for the Drupal application, by the way? If I deploy the JavaScript application, at what point should it stop working? Well, it's working right now. I can still get the movies. There they are. And at what point would the Drupal application stop working? So it's still working here. This is one of the beautiful things about Decoupled, is that I can deploy these applications independent of each other, and assuming there would be a reverse proxy cache in between the Angular and the Drupal, then I would actually be able to deploy Drupal without taking Angular offline, and I don't need to take Drupal offline when I'm deploying Angular, et cetera, et cetera. So it's going through that build process. It's doing it on the server. It's doing it as a part of my Git push, and it's just piping back to me all of the junk that all of those tools are saying. And right now it's getting all sorts of NPM warnings about how I'm managing my dependencies, and we can absolutely just ignore all of that. What I found it's interesting is that building the Angular app actually takes a lot longer than building the Drupal app, probably because of the way that Yeoman and Bauer work together, but I haven't really looked into that. So that's going to keep building. It's going to keep building until it's gone all the way through its build phase, and only at the phase when the code has actually been built and put onto a read-only file system will it ship that over to the application and start to relaunch the application in its running state. And only for that brief moment will Platform have to do something crazy, which is it will start capturing the incoming URLs or the incoming requests to the Angular app, and it will freeze them and hold them and just make the people on the other end wait until the Angular app is completely deployed, and then it'll unfreeze them and play them as if it just had taken a long time. And I think we've all waited for a website to take a long time before, so hopefully that's a better experience than getting a site maintenance page. All right, now it's doing really crazy stuff. It's downloading stuff from GitHub is what it's doing. It's extracting stuff. And it gets into the building stuff shortly after this. There you go. You can start to see it building all that stuff. This is what it looks like, by the way, when you run a Node.js application on Platform as well, like something in the Meteor stack or the Mean stack. And now it's actually going to deploy the application. So all that building, that took a long time because I had to download bunches of stuff, but now it's actually going to deploy. And at some point, if I really diligently reload this over and over and over again, one of those will take a long time, and then we'll have deployed the new application, and we'll see something like, no, I think that's the wrong, yeah, we'll see hello DrupalCamp live in someplace where I wrote it. All right. Let's look a little bit at the Drupal application, though, because this is DrupalCamp after all, and you're probably a little bit more interested in that. As an extra, the fun thing about this Drupal installation is that it's completely installed with Composer. So I did not download Drupal. I did not check Drupal out using Git, and I did not use drush make. I did not do any of those things. I completely used Composer.json to go get my Drupal, as well as all of the modules that I want to run, and build my application in such a way that it runs. How does that work? So the first thing you need to do something like that is a Composer.json file that describes your Drupal application. And this is, I've found, a really nice way to describe a Drupal application. So it's got some boilerplate up here, but you quickly get into it. So you require Drupal core, you require your drush version, you require some other Drupal stuff like the cores module so that I can do the origin requests to the Angular app, devel module, token module, etc. It's that easy. So finally, Drupal deployments have a really sensible package manager, which is Composer. Then, because Platform knows how to resolve a Composer.json file, in the build process, it will go in and it will simply find Composer.json. It will simply resolve all that, pack all the code into the web directory here, where there's already some scaffolding built out. And then I'll have my full Drupal. I mean, as you can see, this is completely empty. Themes is just an empty profiles. These are just empty things. The only exception in this Git repository that you can study is this movies init module. And the sole purpose of the movies init module is twofold. First of all, it uses Drupal-8's inherent configuration management to import the movie content type and fields and the views that are needed to set up the REST API for the Angular app. Just by exporting all of these files and importing them during the installation of Drupal 8, I set up that movie database completely. It completely builds it. It completely builds the content type. It completely builds the view, and it gives me that data feed that the Angular app talks to. I don't have to do anything after I've exported the configuration and put it here. I can transport this application anywhere I want to go and reinstall it and have the same REST API that I showed you. But the API is only one part of it. You also need data, and that's where the Drush folder comes in. So what you'll see in here are various YouTube channel feeds simply saved as they come out. So these are RSS feeds from YouTube channels. And there's a drush command, which is very simple, that imports the movies. It simply reads the XML. And here, if you're curious, this code right there is what it takes to programmatically create content in Drupal 8. So if you've got that question lingering in your mind and you've got a use case for programmatically creating Drupal 8 content, there's a good starting point for you. And all we do with all of that is in this platform file, where am I? One back, yes. In this platform file that describes the application, just like in the Angular bit, there's a set of hooks. This time we only use the deploy hook. So after the code has been built, which is completely done by Composer, then and the deploy hooks run, then the application's ready to go. The database is attached, the storage is attached, everything's running, but we haven't turned it over to the public yet. Then we simply go in and every time we deploy, we run a site install, which completely wipes out the database. So if I create a new movie now and then reinstall it, then if I recommit and push to it, then it's going to wipe it out. That's just because this is a benchmarking installation for me, and it shouldn't change in between benchmarks. So it completely wipes it out. Then it runs the drush command, the movies init. Enables the module. Then it runs the drush command, movies import, that I just showed you. And it probably doesn't even have to do this last bit, the Drupal update DB. And then I've got my complete application online with all of the data that I need to show you the benchmarking. So I'm not going to actually show you deploying that. You're just going to have to imagine it. It looks very similar to the Angular app in that there's green text scrolling on a black background. So if that helps aid your imagination any. But basically, it does actually everything that I just showed you. It uses Composer.json to get to the code, and then after it's imported the site or installed the site, it imports the movie databases from those feeds that I saved from YouTube, and you've got the application that I showed you here with all of that content. Okay, great. So let's talk about the profiling. There are lots of ways that you can profile things. One of the obvious ways would have been to run Apache Bench. Another one would be to use a commercial service like BlazeMeter or an open source tool like JMeter to hit the URL from the outside and just simply measure how many times can it do it, right? It's fair enough because that simulates to some extent what the internet does to you, right? It hits you from the outside and asks you how many times you can do it. What I'm going to show you, though, is actually one tick cooler. How many of you have ever used Xdebug or XHProf or something like that to profile code? How easy is it on a scale of 1 to 10? Somebody yell out. I see a familiar face nodding with a grin. How easy is it? Easy or hard? It's hard, right? You can't reasonably expect your entire team to profile their code on an ongoing daily basis with XHProf unless you really invest in DevOps. and really enable them in some way that takes the responsibility of doing that completely out of their hands, because otherwise it's just too hard. What I'm going to show you, though, is something called Blackfire.io. Blackfire.io is a tool from Sensio Labs, who are the créateurs from Symfony, as they call themselves. And once I've run Blackfire.io on my data feed, I'm going to actually get a drill down chart like this that has all of the functions that have been called in executing that Drupal 8 page. And you'll see that some of them are highlighted, showing that those are the ones that need the performance tuning, or the ones that are potentially problematic or give you a bottleneck. And this one is called the wall time view. This is kind of like the overall view. So like if I drill it down into, what is that? That's composer autoload include file. It took 9.35 milliseconds. Took 11.1 milliseconds of CPU time, and it took 1.14, or the memory that added to the overall memory footprint was big. It was 1.14. There was no disk I/O, so there's nothing on that metric. And if you look across the top here, you can actually see that there are those different metrics here too. So I can change the chart that I'm looking at by going to I/O, and this is the calls out across network or to disk that it has to do where data is being moved around. And you can see that it's a different profile with different bottlenecks. So for I/O, the most I/O intensive function here is SP autoload. And that's auto-loading is probably because it's looking on the disk drive a lot, and that's where the I/O comes from. If I click CPU time, this is where it's the most PHP intensive, and I can see that my critical path for that is somewhat similar to the main critical path, but probably the details are subtly different. So if I go down here, then I find that in terms of CPU time, the biggest bottleneck is unserialized, which gets called 191 times on that page. Really interesting information here. I've got my memory. And here I've got the top database queries. So the top database queries in terms of time spent were select from cache config, where CID is in a set order by CID. So cache config is taking the most database queries. It was called 4 times, and it generated 306 microseconds or whatever those are of time. So that's golden information. That gives you a really great way of profiling your application. Want to see that in action? I simply go to the same page. That was the movies page. And don't let that fool you. The presentation layer being missing doesn't make it so that it's a lot easier for Drupal to serve. It still has to do the full bootstrap, it still has to do database stuff, it still has to load all of its files and do all of its hooks. The only thing that's missing here is that it's not sending me any CS files, and it's probably not sending me HTML, which means that the overall size of this payload is smaller, but in terms of processing, it's not necessarily any easier for Drupal to do than, say, the front page. I'm still authenticated, and it's, in other respects, completely similar. Let's do another profile. It's this easy. I go to the Blackfire button, I push the button, and I say profile. It'll do 10 requests in a row, so I get an aggregated average of those numbers. It's already done, and I can view the comparison. Now it's going to compare it to the last time I ran that, which is in fact on the same infrastructure with the same code and the same PHP version, and everything's the same, so not much is going to change. But it does, because of randomness, there will be some differences. So this one moved from 9.35 milliseconds to 9.05 milliseconds. Woohoo! And you can see some other very subtle differences. That's not interesting at all. Let's do something totally interesting, though, and compare this, which was PHP 5.5, to PHP 5.6. Is it worth it to upgrade? Am I going to see a real benefit? How do I do that? Well, in the platform world, what you would first do normally is you'd go and you'd make a branch, and you'd name that PHP 5.6 upgrade, and you'd test it out there, and when it works there, then you'd roll it back into master or your staging or your QA or whatever other branch you're going to use. And then when you've tested it adequately, you'd finally roll it into master, which is deploying. But we don't have all that time, so we're just going to go in and we're going to go into, where am I? I'm still in the Angular app. I'm going to go into the Drupal app, and I'm going to go into the platform app YAML file, which describes this application. And you'll see right at the top that I've got 3 ways of running this application: PHP 5.5, PHP 5.6, and HipHop VM. Any of these will work with the application mostly, but what I discovered is that the HAL module, I think it is something like that, in Drupal now needs a specific flag to be put into HVM about raw posts being sent, and Platform doesn't successfully convey that message to HipHop VM, so that exact bit currently breaks. There's a bug issue open in Platform, so that will work in HipHop VM in the future, and my demo will work again, and I can show you at a later DrupalCamp. But in the meantime, I can very easily change the PHP version of my application to PHP 5.6 just by changing that one line from 5.5 to 5.6. We'll do the git add, git commit. We'll say git commit am PHP 5.6 and git push. So I guess I get to show you this after all. So what's Platform going to do? Okay, it's going to first of all, it's going to look at the Angular application, and it sees slug already built for this tree ID skipping. That means we didn't change the Angular application. It doesn't need to do anything to it. It's not going to rebuild it, and it's not going to redeploy it. The Angular application stays online the entire time and doesn't get touched. However, it found a Drupal application that needs the runtime type of PHP 5.6, and it's going to go get everything that it needs, including it's finding a composer JSON. It's going to install all the dependencies. It's done that. It's very quick. It's built the application. It's going to send it over to the running services. It's going to redeploy the environment. And in just a little bit of time, then we'll be able to test that new application. Now, this deploy phase takes a little bit longer than it normally would in a normal Drupal deploy, because I'm reinstalling the site every time and ingesting hundreds of videos into the database. So that's all being done in the background as we speak, in the cloud, in fact. So we simply have to wait for the cloud now. But my experience was that it only took 2 to 3 minutes. So if anybody has any good jokes at the moment, you probably have time to blurt them out really loudly right now for everybody to hear. No? Maybe I should show you that QR code again. There you go. Kind of probably wouldn't work very well if you can't see the whole thing. Right. So what it's doing now is definitely reading XML files, parsing XML, and inserting nodes into Drupal. Okay, so I'm going to assume that it's done. It looks like it is. I'll know that it's done by the fact that if I go to the application, I will have lost my session since it's completely reinstalled the application. Fortunately, I've memorized my password. You probably have too. And I can get in there quite easily and take a look. Is my content there? See, I've been a member for 1 minute and 44 seconds. Did you see that? That's kind of cute. If I go into reports, can I confirm that I am now on PHP 5.6? Anywhere? Yes, I can. And great. So I'm now ready to go back to the movie data feed and do another profile. Okay, we'll do, we'll just go ahead and do it. So what I did before I got in here is I did the PHP 5.5 profile, the first one, and I set it as a reference. Now in Blackfire, that's really useful because I can then set assertions so that if I run this automatically as part of my CI routine, of my continuous integration routine, maybe every time I push to the staging server, it has to run Blackfire programmatically, which is totally possible. Then it uses that PHP 5.5 trial run as a reference, and if I exceed that in terms of the memory or the time that it's going over by a certain amount, then I can have Blackfire contact me or raise an alert or say that the tests are failing so that they show up on my CI dashboard. And then I know that my developers have done something really naughty and they've eaten up too much memory, or they've used a bad algorithm, or they've installed some really lousy module from Drupal.org and the site no longer works the way it should. But for now, we'll just use it to compare PHP 5.6, I'll name this test, to the 5.5. And what do we expect? Is it going to be faster? Do you believe the hype? You can believe the hype. It's usually much faster. So, starts off good. The wall view, the wall time, says that overall it was 11 milliseconds faster. Okay? Okay. Faster's faster. You know, it doesn't have to be radically faster as long as it's not slower. And we've got this nice critical path of functions that all turned blue, which means they all got somewhat faster, with the final result being visible down here. We went from 9.35 to 7.69. We went from CPU time, it was much faster. So I'm not sure how to read all these. Not my product. Blue is good. Memory usage, also better. Drupal tends to be a memory hog, so that's really good. I want to run it again. I ran the other test twice to make sure the caches were all fine, and it had a time to stretch its legs and all of that. So let's run it one more time just to make sure. I mean, after all, running these tests is really fast. Why wouldn't we? So we're going to run it again. We'll call it PHP 5.6 number 2. Let's view that comparison. Okay, so something's interesting here. The database performance is not better. That is something really worth looking into. The entire profile is for the database seems to me to be really different. And if this were my project and I were the one deploying it, before I would let people actually convince me to upgrade to PHP 5.6, I'd want to understand what's going on with that change. Is it some anomaly because of Platform or Blackfire, or is Drupal actually interacting with the database in a radically different way on PHP 5.6 than it does PHP 5.5? But overall, we've still got this nice blue line, and if I look at the other drill downs, then I've mostly got nice blue lines, but hey, what's that guy? Why is he taking a lot longer? Run init. He got 10 milliseconds worse. Who knows why? Any case, the point here is that you can very easily, with the combination of Platform, which has the Blackfire integration built into it, and Blackfire, which was created by the best PHP minds on earth, the Symfony people, you can very easily compare different versions of your application, whether they're just different branches, different feature branches, whether they're historically different versions, or whether you're changing something like the underlying PHP version. You can very easily compare them, and you can see the differences in a really easy to parse, really easy to analyze way. So I think that's really cool. I'm only showing you Blackfire because I think it's cool, and because I like the guys. Their offices are close to our offices in Paris, and sometimes our French people go over and speak French at them, and I have no idea what they're saying. So we've got a close relationship, as you can see. Yeah, and there we've done it. I have successfully fulfilled the actual promise of the actual title of the session, and I've compared PHP 5.6 and 5.5 on a headless Drupal running Angular.js. And I've done that while also subtly showing you the product that I work on a daily basis, Platform.sh, and a product that I don't work on, Blackfire.io. And I am now open for any questions that you have, comments, criticism, and that joke that you didn't tell the recent time, you can tell it now. So, who's first? Any questions? Boy, it seems like bureau clock in here. Okay, well, if you really mean it and you really don't have any questions, then I'll either consider that I was a perfect speaker and I answered everything that you could have thought of, or you're really tired and I'll let you go. So thank you, and hope to see you again.